But if you're one of these people who cares about the future of rock and metal, well then you probably should be concerned. What's up everybody, I'm Finn McKenty, this is Punk Rock MBA, and today we're going to talk about one of my very favorite subjects in the world, metalcore. So you remember back in like 2007, 2008 when The Devil Wears Prada and Attack Attack came out, and all of a sudden, like all over the world, everyone was doing the crabcore thing, the breakdowns and synths thing? Or maybe you remember a couple years before that when As They Lay Dying came out, and all of a sudden there was this explosion of bands that was doing the melodic death metal inspired At the Gates core thing, like At the Gates riffs with breakdowns. Or more recently, a couple years ago, when it seemed like the entire metalcore scene was a contest to see who could be the best clone of Architects. I remember all that stuff, I'm sure you do too, but that is old news. In this video, I'm going to talk about the hottest new trend that's taking the metalcore world by a storm, nu metal and butt rock. But first, I want to remind you to check out the Punk Rock MBA podcast. It's live now on all platforms, and also I want to thank Skillshare for sponsoring this video. You guys know that I'm a huge believer in self-improvement and self-education and building the skills that you need to bring your ideas to life, and Skillshare is a great way to do exactly that. But what a lot of you may not know is that I've actually worked in online education as my day job for the last 7 years, and I sincerely believe in Skillshare. This stuff can and will change your life if you actually put in the work. There's tons of content to explore, real projects to create, and also, very importantly, the support of fellow creatives. And I could go on forever about all the great classes they have, but just a few that I personally suggest are Gary Vaynerchuk's social media class. Honestly, I don't think that I would be here doing what I am now without some of the things that I've learned from him about social media. Also, Rand Fishkin's Introduction to SEO. He's kind of like the Tony Hawk of SEO and just generally an incredibly insightful guy. And also Jessica Hish's Hand Lettering for Designers. She's one of the absolute best in the game at hand lettering, and I love learning from her. Skillshare is also incredibly affordable. If you get an annual subscription, it actually works out to less than $10 a month. And the first 500 people who click the link in the description will get 2 free months of Skillshare Premium. And with that out of the way, let's get into it. Now, if you've watched any of my videos, it should be obvious that I absolutely love metalcore. But if I'm being honest, the truth is that it's a pretty trendy genre. And that is exactly what's happening right now with nu metal and butt rock. Everyone wants to sound like a gentler version of Linkin Park or Breaking Benjamin. If you follow new releases in metalcore, then you know what I'm talking about. But for those of you who don't, what I'm talking about is bands that a few years ago sounded like this. But now they sound like this. And no, that is not from 2003, that's from last year. But anyhow, in order to get the bigger picture of what's going on here and understand how it kind of snuck up on me, I think we need to break this big trend into a few smaller trends, kind of the few different flavors of this thing that are happening right now. Come my lady, come my lady, you're my butterfly, sugar baby. The first flavor of this are older bands that started out playing a different style of metalcore, but over the past couple years have kind of slowly transitioned into the djenty nu metal butt rock thing. As a few examples, Northlane, like I mentioned a minute ago, but also the Amity Affliction, and Motionless In White. And this particular part of the trend has been kind of brewing for a while. It really started back in the previous generation during the kind of seniors. As I've talked about in other videos, Suicide Silence was very early to this. They started bringing nu metal elements in on the Black Crown. Of Mice and Men were also pretty early. They started going butt rock and then brought in like full-on nu metal elements in songs like Pain. Footprints in the sand that can't be washed away. And of course, we can't forget Emmure, who had started doing the kind of down-tuned Limp Bizkit thing a long time ago. I think they really went heavy in that direction on their album Slave to the Game in 2012. So I noticed this happening, but I didn't really think much of it because, I mean, that's what older bands do, right? They stop playing breakdowns and turn into radio rock bands so that they can go play those red state rock festivals headlined by like Slash's Snake Pit or whatever. The telltale sign of this happening is when they say that their new material is their most mature stuff yet. That's when you know the butt rock is coming. So that's a pretty normal thing for bands to do, and if it was just that, older bands maturing and turning into butt rock, I wouldn't really think much of it. So what was interesting to me is when I noticed how many younger metalcore bands were starting to do the like nu metal butt rock thing. Which brings us to the next flavor, which is kind of the real focus of this video, the bands that I'm calling buttcore. That's my term for all these younger bands that are called metalcore, but sound a lot more like Breaking Benjamin and Saliva than they do As They Lay Dying or The Devil Wears Prada or Converge. And there's actually a ton of these bands, so I couldn't possibly list all of them, but two of the biggest ones would be like I Prevail and Wage War. As well as some smaller bands like Crystal Lake, Polaris and Bury Tomorrow, and on and on and on. There's dozens and dozens of these bands. So what's interesting is that these bands are called metalcore, and if you look at them, they look like metalcore bands. But I don't know, listen to this ADEMA song from 2003 and tell me it couldn't be from one of these Australian buttcore bands in 2020. Could be the hottest new Japanese or Australian buttcore band, right? And I personally find it kind of weird that a younger band would want to play this style that to me sounds so dated. But if I turn on my Witcher sense and like trace the steps, I can see how we got here.
Strange.
After the crabcore thing, everybody went djent, and that was cool for a while, but then I think everybody kind of realized, like, you know what, actually playing the like wheelie parts is kind of not that fun live, nobody goes off for them. What people really like are the groove parts. And really, those parts are not that different from like nu metal bounce riffs, right? I mean, if you take djent and strip out all the wheelie Sumerian chord parts, you pretty much have nu metal. And as I've kind of talked about in some other videos, I think nu metal has mostly washed the stink off itself. The stigma of nu metal, I would say in 2020, is pretty much completely gone. As compared to like 10 or 15 years ago, where it was absolutely not acceptable at all to listen to nu metal, that's really not the case anymore. In fact, I would say it's the opposite. I would say that it's actually unfashionable now to not like nu metal. I mean, if you don't believe me, say anything negative about Mudvayne on the internet and see what happens. Or as another couple examples, my video about nu metal is the biggest one on my channel. It has over 1 million views now, and almost all the comments are overwhelmingly positive, which would definitely not be the case in like 2009, 2010. And if you look at a site like Loudwire, which I would say is pretty representative of the overall sentiment of what rock and metal fans feel at the moment, over there, it's all people getting nostalgic and misty-eyed about Godsmack and Papa Roach. What a time to be alive.
I feel so alive.
Anyhow, although I'd say the buttcore flavor of this is definitely the biggest part of the trend is actually even bigger than that. There are a couple other flavors. For example, there's even a little bit of a rap metal revival going on. Basically, a bunch of newer bands that sound like Boom by POD. This stuff is definitely not as common as the buttcore flavor, but it is out there. The biggest name would probably be Fever 333. But there are some smaller bands doing it as well. For example, Unity TX, Dropout Kings, and Ocean Grove. To be honest, I don't personally love this particular style. I love metal, I love rap. I just don't really like it when metal bands try to rap. I don't think it comes out well 99.9% of the time. But that said, to look on the bright side, the fact that rap metal is coming back a little bit means that there is a chance that somebody might cover my favorite Methods of Mayhem song, which contains what I think might be the single cringiest line ever uttered in all of music. And yes, you heard that correctly. He said, "Shooting my jizzy jizzle." Anyway, I'll try to erase that from my mind as we move on to the next segment, the bands that I'm calling new hardcore. And as you might guess from the name, this refers to all the bands that come from the hardcore scene, but play something that sounds a lot more like nu metal than it does hardcore. The big names here, of course, would be Vane and Code Orange. But there are actually quite a few smaller bands doing this stuff as well. For example, this band Face Wreck.
I'm a nice guy, but you're wearing me down, about to bring it to your hardcore.
Which I think is a joke. I hope it's a joke, because this is incredibly bad, even for a joke band. And probably the most interesting of all these bands to me is Omerta.
I'm gonna keep 1,000 rounds until your pretense is dead. Look at me now! Look at me now!
I'm not sure why, but I'm kind of into this. It sort of sounds like an Il Nino demo from like 2001. I back it. Oh yes, and of course, can't forget Varials Spa. They went from playing like pretty standard beatdown kind of stuff to, again, doing a more Deftones inspired thing. And I just love their name because, you know, I've always wanted to go to one of those spas and just be pampered for a day, right? Like, I work hard, I deserve it. So please, anybody out there who wants to surprise me for my birthday, get me a gift certificate to Varials Spa. I need a day off.
It's not your average jacuzzi. The bubbles are very aggressive.
And I have to admit, this really took me by surprise. I never, ever, ever thought it would be acceptable to play nu metal in the hardcore scene, given how much people in hardcore just absolutely hated that stuff back when it was current. But I should have known better because, like I said, you give anything enough time and it eventually becomes acceptable to like it. Even nu metal.
Come on, get down with the sickness.
And if it sounds like I am not incredibly stoked on this trend in general, well, you would be right. I don't love it. I don't hate it or anything like that. It's just kind of A, uninteresting to me in a creative sense, and B, raises some concerns to me from a business perspective. And to explain what I mean, let's take a look at what else? A chart. Let's start by zooming out a little bit and dividing the alternative music scene up along two axes. On this axis here, we have heaviness, from not heavy to heavy, and on the vertical axis, the age of the audience, older on top, younger on the bottom. And if you put all these together, you can kind of start to see where this stuff fits into the bigger picture. Up here in the box where the audience is older and the music is heavier, you have death metal, black metal, stoner rock, and whatever you want to call bands like Converge and Dillinger, hipster hardcore, I guess. And over here on the other side of it, where the audience is older but the music is not as heavy, that is where you would put things like real emo or ska and whatever, like singer, songwriter, folksy kind of stuff that people get into when they stop listening to music with breakdowns. And down here in the area where the music is not heavy and the audience is younger, that's where you have stuff like emo rap and all that like alternative pop, bubblegum bass kind of stuff, and whatever the fuck 100 gex is.
Hey, you little piss baby, you think you're so fucking cool, huh?
And over here in the box where the audience is younger but the music is heavy, that is where you would put stuff like Beat Down, like Knock Loose and all that kind of stuff. All the new school deathcore stuff like Shadow of Intent and all that. And probably like trap metal. So where does buttcore and all this other stuff fit in? I think pretty much right in the middle, in this circle. And as you can see, it kind of touches on all the boxes without ever going to the extreme. And I think that that kind of tells the story of buttcore. I think it's for the like 25 or 30-year-old who grew up listening to Linkin Park and Slipknot in high school, then got into metalcore, and then as they got older, they kind of mellowed out, as people tend to do with age. And like a lot of people do when they get older, they sort of wanted to retreat back to the safety of the music that they liked in high school. And to be clear, I'm not saying that's a bad thing at all. I'm not in the business of telling people to stop liking stuff. If the bands are happy playing it and their fans like it, I genuinely think that's great. That's ultimately the only thing that matters. But to me personally, it's kind of underwhelming for two reasons. First of all, from an artistic perspective, I personally am most interested in things that push the limits. I like stuff that's either super fucking heavy, like Demolisher or Cerebral Incubation, or stuff that's super pop, like Charlie XCX or Lady Gaga, or I guess you'd put Blink-182 over there. And to me, this stuff is just kind of safe. Not too heavy, not too pop, it's just kind of straight down the middle. And I personally don't find that interesting. Which kind of brings me to my second point, which is really my biggest criticism of all this stuff. All these bands are totally competent. I don't think any of them are bad. But I think they're really lacking what made the original wave of nu metal and butt rock as popular it was in the first place, which is the songs and the stars. I don't see a lot of either of those in these bands. Say what you want about the OG nu metal and butt rock bands, they were super cringy in many, many ways, don't get me wrong, but you gotta give them credit where it's due. The best of those bands had some seriously fucking good songs and huge star power. For example, if you ever go to a show and they're playing music before one of the bands, if they ever play Southtown or Nookie or Last Resort, everybody knows it. Everybody goes off, even if they were a little bit too young to have experienced it the first time around. That's just how good these songs are.
Cut my life into pieces. This is my last resort.
Or on the butt rock side of things, yes, those bands are cheesy as hell, but they had some seriously great songs. Truly like timeless classic songs. And if you don't believe me, go look on Spotify. It's kind of amazing how many listeners a lot of these bands still have. Like, for example, Trapped, of all bands, still has 2 million monthly listeners. And that's even with an older fan base that doesn't do streaming that much. And as far as the like image and marketing side of things, I personally found the whole nu metal aesthetic pretty cringe, but the success of all those bands speaks for itself. I mean, whether you liked it or not, you couldn't not pay attention to bands like Coal Chamber or Static X, or even like a smaller band like Motograter or Mushroomhead. Say what you want about those bands, you can call them corny all day long, but at the end of the day, they knew how to stand out from a crowd, they knew how to get attention, and I can't really say that the same is true of this whole new wave of buttcore bands. I mean, can you really tell the difference between any of these bands? And to be clear, I'm not saying that to talk shit, I'm just saying that concerns me from a business perspective. It's actually a very similar problem to what a lot of these big consumer products companies have. For example, if you go to the toothpaste aisle at Target, there's probably like 50 to 100 items on that wall, and it's very hard for you as a shopper to tell them apart, right? Like, do I want Pro Health with extra whitening and enamel protection, or do I want enamel protection with whitening and fluoride? As a shopper, I have no idea how those are different, and I kind of feel the same way about all these buttcore bands. Again, if they're happy playing this stuff and you enjoy it, that's great, good for them. But if you're one of these people who cares about the future of rock and metal, well then you probably should be concerned. I mean, if the biggest trend in modern rock and metal is doing a watered down version of Breaking Benjamin and Saliva, what does that tell you about the future of the genre? All this just kind of tells me that things are gonna kind of continue to go the way that they have been. Rock bands don't really want to do anything new or take any chances. The fans don't want them to either, and so it is what it is. The Scorpions and Testament will keep headlining festivals until they can't walk anymore, and then I don't know what happens. Who's gonna replace them? With all due respect to them, I really don't see Northlane or Crystal Lake filling those shoes. Alright my friends, that does it for this video. I'd love to hear what you think about buttcore. Is that the best genre name ever? I think it might be. Let me know what you think in the comments. Also, if you haven't, please check out the Punk Rock NBA podcast. There's a new episode every Monday. It's live now on all podcast platforms. Second, as I have mentioned in other videos, I'm going hard on LinkedIn right now. If you want to talk about business with me, connect with me on LinkedIn. There's a lot of cool stuff going on over there. If you add me on there, you'll see why. And lastly, I want to thank everyone who supports us on Patreon, especially those who support at the True Cult level or above. It is because of your support that we're able to do the podcast. Because of you guys, I was able to hire a producer and editor who makes the whole thing happen. She's amazing. So thank you very much to everyone who supports over there. If you are interested in supporting, there's a link to that in the description. Patrons get all the podcasts a week early. I do a monthly Q&A session. There's an opportunity for me to review your band or YouTube channel or podcast or any other project you want to send my way. So if you are interested, hit that link in the description. And with that, I will sign off for now, but I will see you next time.